Welcome, listeners, to the Leadership Journey. We are here to equip and encourage you to be a flourishing leader of a flourishing school. We are traveling the Christian school leadership journey together, and we do that through articles, interviews, and online meetups. My name is Matthew Mann. I'm the director of this leadership journey. I work for the Pelita Harapan Group as the director of academics and innovation. And today's topic is leading with prayer. And I'm very fortunate today to be hosting several guests who have just arrived in Indonesia yesterday. They're both from California Baptist University. I have Dr. Robin Duncan, Dean of the School of Education, and Dr. Stacy Meyer, Associate Dean, also of the School of Education. So welcome to Indonesia, welcome to SPH. I'm very pleased to have you with us and to share today with our leaders who are in this group of schools and also beyond about leadership. We'll talk about prayer today and also just let our conversation flow to a couple of other topics, but generally speaking about that. Before we go, you've been here for 24 hours. Share a first impression, something that's memorable or a surprise that you've had so far in Indonesia.
Well, for me, it's a bit of a homecoming. So I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time in Indonesia about 10 years ago. So it's just been a real blessing to come back, see the friendly faces and reconnect. So it's been a real blessing.
I think for me, just the hospitality and generosity of people. Everybody has been so welcoming, from the people you pass on the street to those who have been hosting us. And yeah, I have a feeling many of our students, including ourselves, are going to be back often.
Yeah, well, it's such a warm country, not just the temperature outside, which is hot and humid, but very warm people. Have you had spicy food yet?
I love the spicy food. This morning I had nasi goreng for breakfast, spicy nasi goreng, so I love that. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to, first of all, just thank you for sharing with me the title of the book that you proposed. When I heard that you were coming here, I extended an invitation thinking we would talk about transformational leadership. And in the end, you suggested this book, and I was so glad that you did, because I downloaded it. I've got my Kindle version going, and I haven't been able to get very far in the book, honestly speaking, because it makes me stop. And it makes me stop because I'm feeling convicted by it. I'm feeling like if I were to continue reading this chapter, I would be disobeying. I've got to stop and pray. Right. So thank you for that. It's a slow read for me. One of the phrases that I jotted down as I read the first intro or forward section was, one goal of this book is to function as a personal trainer in prayer. I thought that's just brilliant, and I want to be a better prayer, and so this book is going to help me do that better. So first of all, thank you for that, and then secondly, tell me why did you choose it? Why did you recommend this book when I reached out to you?
Well, actually, my friend at Biola University recommended it to me, so that's how I heard of it. June Hetzel. June, she is an amazing woman. She took me under her wing, I feel like, when I moved to California. And so leaders developing leaders, right? So she recommended that for me. Obviously, I think prayer is important, but I hadn't read the book prior to that. So then I shared it with our two associate deans in the School of Education. And yeah, I just, like you said, we all pray, we know the importance of it, but making it habit. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, maybe if we get to it, but how we've infused that into our practice at CBU. So
I definitely want to get into the practice side. But before we get there, let's start with the why part. You know, why leading with prayer is so important. And the structure of the book is that the first third is about why, and then he turns to practical steps for the leader, and then corporate prayer in a community as well. But you know, I've been leading for about 20 some years in different schools and capacities. And honestly, when I look back, at no point would I ever have disagreed with the idea that prayer is important as a leader. You know, there can't be a Christian school leader out there who would actually say or believe that it doesn't matter. And yet I suspect that most would be like me in looking back and thinking, I didn't actually pray enough. I didn't pray as much as I know I should have. So I think something of some part of that is that in my heart I haven't believed that it's important enough. I say it's important and I believe it, but I haven't really believed it. So can you just dwell on that for a moment and consider me or the listeners out there who maybe in their deepest hearts don't actually believe it's that important. Why is it important?
Well, like you, as I read that book, it's difficult to move forward because you think, I need to stay here and put this into practice. And so for me, I went through there underlining things and literally printed them out on a piece of paper so that I could go back and look at them. And one of the statements in the book, the authors say, we don't want to be people who are so busy serving Jesus that we're not spending time with him. And that for me was a why. Looking back thinking, gosh, we're Christian leaders, we're doing ministry, we're doing all of this great work, but how much time are we actually spending with Jesus? We fill our calendar with so many important meetings, but does my calendar reflect the most important? And I find that convicting as a leader, because how could we expect that of anybody we're leading if we're not doing it ourselves?
Mm.
Also, in another quote, prioritize prayer even at the expense of productivity. As leaders, there's so many things that we need to be doing. So how can I focus and remain in that state of prayer all the time? But also, obviously, we have things we have to do. But our why should always come back to the Lord, and staying in prayer will keep that evened out.
Mm-hmm.
To produce fruit, and it talks about this in the book. To produce fruit, you have to take care of the roots.
Right.
And are we doing that? And specifically in the School of Education, when we are training teachers who are leaders as well, to lead in their classroom, we need to be modeling that with our own people as well.
Mm-hmm.
We do. As I was reading it through, I was so impressed by the stories of the leaders that they interviewed, because the model of this book is go out and find, let's say, superstar Christian leaders, not in Christian education, this is bigger than that, right? And find out, what do they do? What are your leadership practices? And over and over again through the book, you meet these little anecdotes or narratives of leaders who would spend literally hours in prayer, which is a really long time. And as you say, we're busy and we're driven. Like, typically you become a leader because you're motivated to produce, right? You're efficient, you have ambitions, and that takes time, and you hate wasting time. and somehow I think maybe subconsciously we might situate like sitting, prayer is sitting and it's not doing in a visible way, but maybe somehow we've mixed categories and thought of that as unproductive.
Absolutely.
I hate to say that, but I wonder if...
I think that's honest.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's honest that we feel that way. Although we know when we face those difficult situations and we've been with the Lord and spent the time we need to, we know that facing those are not easier per se, but the clarity of how to move forward. I don't know if we want to jump into practice.
Well, I think also as leaders, we have strength in leadership, right? That is one of the ways we've been gifted, but the reality is our gifts in an unhealthy place are our weaknesses. And we tend to rely on our own ability and not the Lord. And that's what that looks like. Can we be productive? Can we produce a lot? Absolutely. But at some point, that's going to be our strength, which has now become a weakness.
We are so focused on the doing and the productivity that we also are tying our own success to that activity, right? And so it takes a humility to sit back, doesn't it? Fundamentally, a deep humility to be a praying person, because it is an admission that we can't do it on our own.
Right. And thankfully we can't, right? we're so, I mean, it's humbling to know that we can't, but it's also peace of knowing that we're not on our own, that we know we can't, So we know that we have the Lord with us, and that peace when you face those impossible what seems like an impossible situation coming your way, but then the Lord makes a way that you couldn't even see. How many meetings have we gone into, Stacy, where we're like, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know, and then we can't work it out, and then the Lord just opens this door, and we go, wow, I did not see that outcome, but that's because we can't, but He can.
Sure.
And I think that natural outpouring of prayer leads us to praying in those meetings, praying through those meetings, and then we just see an outcome that we think, how did that ever come about? We didn't see we didn't see a resolution, or we didn't see a way forward. And then that reminds us that it's not, because it's not us, it's not our ideas.
I want to get to the practical side first, but just before we go there, I've got a little collection of verses that the authors quote in the book. And here's one that should make anyone pause. It is, "Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you." So the leader who does not pray for his or her team, students, people, family, is actually sinning against them. Wow. That omission is a sin. So that's a motivation for us. That's a reason why. And the other thing I wrote down is this quotation that I heard many, many years ago from my pastor, who quoted Hudson Taylor, who said, "When we work, we work. When we pray, God works." It's so short and simple and pithy, but of course, right? I mean, if I can get the God of the universe working by praying, I'd be stupid not to.
Well, and on the why, what did Jesus himself do? Got up very early in the morning, went alone to pray. And if Jesus himself needed to separate and pray, and then pray, why would I think I don't need that? On a regular basis, and he would pray and over and over until the disciples slept, right? But so if the Lord himself needed that, who am I to think that I don't need that time?
So tell me now about your own prayer life and application. So you are leaders. You're working in a faculty. You have school leadership experience. You have followers. What practices have you acquired or nurtured over the years that, whether they're from the book or just things that you think are practices that work for you?
I think on a personal level, you have personal prayer, but I think when you're talking about leadership, I think really contemplating where can you tie prayer in? Where, we so often just follow this pattern that we've always seen. We kind of default to the way we have always been led. So I think this book kind of causes you to think what needs to change. I think for us, Robin is a great example for me, because she is the first one in a situation to say, you're having a bad day, let me pray for you. It's evident that she has a prayer life. And so as somebody following a leader, I can think to myself, well, that must be important. She's allowing me space because of how she's modeling it herself for me to do the same, which causes me to think, okay, well, the people that I lead, like students and so forth, what does that look like to now incorporate prayer? And it takes practice. You were talking about training before, and even in the book, he talks about, what's the difference between someone who plays golf and a golfer, or someone who sings and a singer, and someone who prays? You should be a prayer. You're building this muscle to the point where it becomes second nature. Right. And I think that I have seen that in my own walk, even in this position, grow because of good leadership and people who have modeled that.
I love that line about being a golfer, because I am someone who used to run periodically. And lately, I can say I am a runner. And so that means something to me about prayer as well. Right. And I only have 1 week of working through this book, but I can see how, as it's given me new ideas, I'm acquiring. In 1 week you don't become a prayer in a significantly changed way, but I can see the beginnings of that.
And it's a lifelong journey, right? In different seasons. When I was a young mom, my prayer life looked different. And we don't arrive in this lifetime. We never get it figured out, but we keep striving. And so prayer life may be 5 minutes. If you're a young mom and you're trying to manage everything in a household, and then in different seasons of life, you have that space to do more of it. And of course, we need to make that space, because we can, again, come up with a lot of things to do, because we're very good doers, usually as leaders. So I do schedule my prayer too, because I know that I need to carve that time out. I can't just wait for there to be a free moment. And what's the old adage? Look at your checkbook and your calendar. What do you prioritize? So if I need to put that on my calendar, I can put it on my calendar. And for me, at this stage in my life, I live by my calendar. When I was a young mom, I lived by my children's calendar. Right? So it does certainly look different in different phases of life. So I think, showing yourself grace while at the same time prioritizing that, because it's not a burden, but we know it's where our strength comes from. So. Right.
And that was clear in the book, that as they interview these very gifted, faithful leaders, there are many ways that people approach being a prayerful person. There are principles that are common among them all, that they do it seriously, they do it in an organized way, and they spend significant periods of time at it. But it looks different. It has, and I appreciated that. One of the concepts that they talk about is a rule of life, which is I think a pretty ancient idea. I forget who first was speaking about this, but this is what they're talking about. A rule of life is a pattern of spiritual disciplines that provides structure and direction for growth in holiness. So it's not an externally imposed rule, it's a self-produced rule, as in, I will make for unless you join an order like a monk or a nun, right? But I will create for myself my own rule of life, that I am convicted, for example, that every morning I must read the Bible and pray, and that be more than just a minute, but that I will wake up a little earlier and I will organize my reading and I will set my prayer list in a particular way. And I just found that concept useful, the rule of life. That this it's capital R rule, like a almost. In fact, I think a document. And I've started sketching that out. As okay, I want to be organized and disciplined about this. So, what does that mean for me?
Yes, and still allowing for that not to become right. How do we balance? Yes, we need rules for life, and we need structure, because otherwise we let it go. But at the same time, not making it a checklist, and because we are achievers, right? As leaders, so
or legalistic,
or I've checked my box for today, and what is your rule of life? What is mine? And it's not a comparison game. It's not a checklist, but it's a relationship, right? So we haven't talked. We're from California Baptist University in Southern California. And we're a university committed to the Great Commission, right? So go, therefore, make disciples. And we think of the go a lot, but I know that translation can also be as you go. So I think about that a lot, because I think so often, yes, we need to go. And that's more of that directive, right? That like specific, I'm going to go and make disciples. But it's also as you go. And so when you think about prayer life, when you think about all of the Christian life, right, it is all as we go. Jesus was praying as he went all the time, and we have to do the same thing. So again, that balance of as we go and going. So it's just...
Yeah, I agree. And the chapter called Leaders as Practicing the Presence of God is instructive, right? It's this idea that we ought always to be in prayer, always mindful of Christ and inviting him to be with us.
Yeah.
And I think too about even thinking a little bit about the rule and that as you go too, what platform have we been given?
Right.
As leaders, we have been given a very specific platform. For us right now, it's in a Christian institution where students know and our colleagues know this is what they're going to hear. And how are we stewarding that well? The lives of the children that we're impacting, how are we stewarding that well? And to me, I think that, for me, that's a rule of life. Like, I need to steward that well, or I need to move out of the way so somebody else can do that.
You brought a book along here, and can you just explain a little about who wrote this and why you think of this book when we're talking about prayerful leadership?
Sure. So again, we're at California Baptist University, a Baptist university in Southern California. So it's an interesting space to be in California. But this is a book called We're Ready, written by our president, Ron Ellis. He's been president of the university for 30 years. So as leaders go, that's a long tenure for any leader, much less a leader coming into a struggling institution. At the time we were about to go under when he took over 30 years ago, we had 808 students, and now we have over almost 12,000 students. And his leadership, I admire him so much, and it's an interesting book. I highly recommend it as a read. But just really looking at all the ways the Lord had prepared him, as well as I think his leadership and keeping the focus on the Great Commission. So we're unapologetically a Christian university committed to the Great Commission. And so in all that we do, in doing that with excellence, we try to do everything at the university we can with excellence, but also always keeping focus that we are, as we are going, making disciples. And so none of that happens without prayer. None of that happens without the Lord, where we, it's just been a blessing to be under his leadership. And as I read it, I just kept thinking about this conversation and what his leadership has meant at the university.
That's an inspiring story.
Yeah.
I'm sure he is a prayerful person. I haven't met him.
Absolutely. No, he is. Absolutely. And he keeps us committed in that way. And I think that focus is important. And I do think, again, without the prayer, we can easily lose that focus.
What would you most recommend for our listeners who someone out there is saying, you know what, I get what you're saying. I get that it's important. I haven't been that great at it yet. What should I do? Like, what would be advice to share with somebody who wants to be a more prayerful person?
You need to be intentional to look at the space that you are in daily first. So for us, we're in the classroom, we're in meetings one-on-one with students, we're with faculty. And so after we read the book, we started to infuse some of those things into those spaces. So, with faculty, we spent extended time with the Lord. Okay, we're going to pull from our meeting time, and we're going to go and we're going to send you out to spend extended time with the Lord. And you can work through something, or it's hard to spend extended time with the Lord when it's a muscle you have to build up.
Yeah. You talked about that earlier. A minute in prayer, an hour in prayer. And so we did. We gave up some time at our beginning of the meeting. So if you're a leader who has the ability to fix an agenda, adjust an agenda, right? And so you've got an 8-hour meeting maybe at the beginning of the year training. Can you take out an hour? And what can you sacrifice? What was that quote? Prioritize prayer even at the expense of productivity. So could you make the meeting a little bit shorter and take that extended time? And our faculty really appreciated that. We told them, bring your Bible, bring a chair, and go find a place on campus and just sit and spend time with the Lord. So that kind of thing. And then the other thing I think Stacey can talk about too is just how we've tried to model that with students. So you want to...
Well, with students and with faculty in the classroom. So even talking about what does that look like when you're asking students, you're building space into your own classroom for a prayer request. And you're being consistent in those things. I think sometimes we think, well, I have so much content to get through. I get to the end of my hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, and I don't have time for prayer requests. But we've had more students say, no, that is what mattered the most. And you all of a sudden see such an impact on these students through what we may think is not really a big deal, because it's, I spend 5 minutes praying, but they're encouraged by hearing one another, and it is growing them. But then working one-on-one with students. So students go through different phases. We've all been through different phases in life. So challenges. And we bring students into a meeting and we sit down with them, and we always start with prayer. And quite honestly, the first time I brought a student into my office, that was a concern. There was a concern about a student. I didn't know what to do. I didn't really even know how to start the conversation. And so I had to start in prayer. simply because I was beyond myself. And I prayed, and then I just asked the student, tell me about yourself. And then as they started to share, and they started to realize, oh, you care more about whatever the concern was. I hadn't even addressed anything. And you start to see these people from a whole different perspective, and you think, okay, no wonder you're struggling. All these other things are taking place. And you just see the Lord work. You start with prayer. Every time I pray, Lord, direct this conversation. You created this person in your image. They're created with a purpose. Help us to figure out what that is.
As leaders, we have tons of those crucial
Yes.
conversations, those hard conversations, right? And so I think modeling in your prayer when you're saying, God, I don't lead in this conversation. God, we ask for your wisdom in this meeting, because then you're modeling saying, we talked about this, I think, before we started recording. I don't know the answer to this conflict or this difficult situation we're dealing with. And so modeling that for either students, or if you're a principal, maybe your teacher you're working with, there's a difficult, you're modeling, Lord, we're coming into this looking for your guidance. And then from there, he provides a way. Most often we didn't see coming.
Awesome. I love that. Well, you are going to be dealing with jet lag and need to have an afternoon nap before whatever happens this evening. And our listeners need to sign off and pray.
That's right. Stop listening to us and go pray. That's my advice.
So I'd like to express my thanks on behalf of the many leaders in our group and beyond who will be listening to this, and for the encouragement that book has been for me personally. I've enjoyed our conversation and wish you a wonderful week of traveling in Indonesia. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. And if you would like to participate in our leadership journey and are not yet in there, you can go to leadershipjourney.substack.com and sign up for the emails. Signing off. Thanks again.